Welcome. Welcome, everyone. We're excited you're here, and we've got some great presentations and discussions coming up over the next 3 days. This is the 5th of the Teach E conferences, and we're hoping it's going to be our best yet. And welcome to our first session. It's going to be a panel discussion. We have a really great panel here today, and it's called Teaching the Teachers. Okay. Now, there's a lot we don't know about optimal teaching, or even what great teaching is. And in fact, if you go to an most economic education conferences, including this one, are primarily about how can we teach better? How can we do a better job in our classrooms? Okay. But I think it's important to kind of step back and understand that there's a lot we do know. Okay. There's having students work with concepts and solve problems in the class works better than having students just sit there and passively listen to a lecture taking notes. Okay, there's excellent evidence for that. We know that we should be encouraging students to learn from each other, and that can be through small group activities in the classroom, group projects outside the classroom, even just encouraging people to work together on problem sets and homework. We know that works well. Okay. We know that our classrooms are full of diverse set of students, and it's important that we use examples that lots of students in the class can relate to, and use different examples because different students are going to relate better to different examples. Okay, so we know a lot of these things. We also know that there are a lot of economics instructors, perhaps even most, that don't do any of these things. Okay. We know a lot of people stand up, and we know this from survey data, and as well as just kind of looking around with our eyes open, that a lot of our colleagues stand up and they talk, and at the end of class, they walk out of the room, and that's that. And a class is a set of exams and a set of problem sets and a set of lecture slides, okay, or notes that you write on the board. Okay. So how do we get our colleagues to do a better job? And why is it that they're not using kind of the latest and greatest teaching techniques? That's what this panel is all about. Okay, how can we teach the teachers? Now, we've got 4 panelists for this discussion, all of whom have thought long and hard about these exact issues. They've all tried different things and bring great experience to the table. And I'm really excited. They've shared a lot of their experiences with me already, and I'm really excited to kind of hear, to have you all hear what they have to say as well. Okay. So our first guest is going to, I'm going to introduce all 4 right now, and then each will give a 3 to 5 minutes kind of opening take. And then discussions at Teach E Conference are about the discussions. Okay. And so we're excited to hear your questions and really have a conversation here. So our first panelist is Michael Enns. He's the Director of Professional Development in the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning at Virginia Tech. And before taking this job, he taught economics at 6 different colleges. It's impressive. I thought I'd been around the block, but Michael's certainly even been more around the block than me. And then second, we're going to have Dimitri Petropoulou, who teaches economics at the London School of Economics, where she's led several initiatives to improve teaching at the department. And some of those things that she's talked about with me have been really super interesting. And then Ralph Becker is an econometrician at the University of Manchester. He has a passion for teaching, so don't we all, Ralph? That's why we're here. And he's also led teaching initiatives in his department, and he works with Dimitra on teaching initiatives as part of the Economics Network. Okay. And then our 4th panelist is Anoshua Chowdhury, who's the Senior Director of the Center for Equity and Excellence in Teaching and Learning at San Francisco State University. Okay. We'll start with Michael, And when you have questions, please do post them in the chats, and then I'll try to kind of keep track and then pass the questions on to the panelists. All right, Michael, we'll start with you.
Excellent. Thank you, Doug. And thank you for reminding me that I've been around a little bit. Thank you. So my talk today will probably sound like I'm trying to sell you on what our center does, and that's not my intention. Instead, my intention is to hopefully provide you with some information about what centers do in general, because I don't think that there are drastic differences in what centers do, at least across the United States, I think in this case. So I'll just give you a quick preview of different types of programming and services that we offer to all faculty in order to improve teaching and learning. So the first one is we offer a Principles of Effective Teaching certificate program, and that's a semester-long program that includes meeting together in person for several sessions, and then we have a peer evaluation or peer kind of consultation / evaluation. And then also I go and observe each person in their classroom and provide them with feedback on what I saw and thoughts on how to improve. We offer a course design clinic that stresses the practice of backward course design. We do this 3 times a year, in August before the fall semester, in December to get people ready for the spring semester, and then in May for either the summer or the people who really want to get a jump start the next fall. Our most popular service is our mid-semester feedback. So we have a range of time during the semester that we take up 15 minutes of class time. We come on in, we kick the instructor out, and we talk to the class about what's going well in terms of their learning, what's not going well, or what's impeding their learning. And then we take specific ideas about what they think could change. And we allow the entire class to vote on whether they strongly agree that should change, all the way down to strongly disagree. So then when we meet with the faculty member afterwards, we can go over all of the results and then try to kind of parse through the different things that we're hearing from their students. And we encourage conversations with the class after that. We don't tell them, hey, you have to do this. Instead, sometimes it's just a simple issue of communication. You're already doing something and people don't realize it. So it's a great opportunity for them to communicate with their classroom. We do individual classroom observations where, once again, we have a debrief afterwards. We discuss what we saw and offer some advice on how to improve. We do individual consultations that can range anything from, hey, I'm thinking about doing this particular activity in class. What do you think? How should I go about doing it? To here's a copy of what I plan for my syllabus. Anything that instructors want to talk to us about. We put on different workshops each semester. This semester, we're offering about 10 different workshops, everything from helping students improve their metacognitive skills to building community within the classroom. We have a welcome back symposium each fall. We bring in a keynote to kick it off, a keynote to end it, and in between we have concurrent sessions from Virginia Tech faculty. We help put on a conference that's open to everyone every February, a conference on higher education pedagogy. We offer a lot of different grants and try to honor a lot of our instructors with different awards each year. And then finally, I'm trying to do 10 categories here since the state of Louisiana brought 10 back into play. We have 3 to 4 communities of practice where we get together once a month and under some sort of theme, like large class community of practice, and we bring in guest speakers that help talk about different issues that are coming up for those communities. And then finally, we try to support 1 to 2 book clubs each semester. Like this coming fall, we're going to do How Learning Works, 8 research-based principles for improving learning. So I think I'm within my 5 minutes there, Doug. I can take a look at, I think there might have been at least one question that popped up. I don't know if you want me to just save that for later or to try to.
Actually, well, I think the question that showed up in the chat is actually very similar to the question I had. And so why don't we go ahead and we'll do one question just to whet our palate, and then we'll move on.
Sure.
These services sound great, including the class visits by the teaching center, everything. It all sounds great. How do you get people to take up the services?
Yeah, largely advertise. And the first time we get in front of faculty is at the new faculty welcome. And so we go to that and hand out a bunch of different information about everything we're doing. For the most part, the people that come to see us are those that want to see us. But we do get the people whose department chairs have said, "Hey, you really should go see CETL," and sometimes that works out very well because they still are seeking change. Sometimes we get some faculty that kind of openly admit, "I'm only here because my department chair says I should come here." And that's more difficult to work with, but any chance we get to get them in front of us, we welcome.
Do you keep track of who's coming and what kind of response rates you get? Like, do you have a sense for what fraction of the faculty are actually using the services at the university?
Yeah, so this is my first year in the center. And so what I decided to do, I want to know two main things. I want to know, how do people find out about us? Because I wanted to be able to reach the most people we could. But I also wanted to know, are we affecting any change? And so we started just this year implementing a survey at the end of each semester, asking people if they were able to go back to their classrooms and change anything they were doing. And if so, what that experience was like. But this is the first year we've done that.
Got it. All right. Next up, Demetra.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I apologize about my very croaky voice. I'm recovering from a cold, but hopefully you can understand me. It's all fine. So, trying to share screen a minute. Yep. Hopefully you can see this. Is that fine? I'm not hearing anything, so can someone speak up and tell me it's okay?
It looks good, Demetra.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, very quickly, I've only got 5 minutes. So at LSE, we historically had a very poor teaching evaluation, which is very unfortunate, but in the last few years, we have turned the whole thing around. Just to give you a little bit of context, we do a lot of teaching at LSE, both to econ students and students on other programs taking economics modules. So students take large lectures, but also small classes in groups of at most 20. And that's really a big part of our culture here at LSE. But what this means on the ground is we have over 4,000 hours of small group economics class teaching to deliver. And the people who deliver this are our wonderful PhD students who are graduate teaching assistants, and we have around 100 of them, somewhere between 90 and 100. So we're lucky we have a very large PhD program. But a lot of these teachers are very skilled, very interested in the subject, but very new to teaching. And because of the scale of these modules, we could have easily 8 or 10 different teachers teaching across 35 or 40 class groups. So we had a lot of historic dissatisfaction, and we can really trace this back to heterogeneity, right? With so many people teaching, the experience will inevitably vary, and some of that is fine. Everybody should teach also in a way they find suitable to them, but at the same time, we wanted some consistency of experience and of quality. We also need to sort of train our PhD students up, and we would be putting our fresh PhD students with no experience precisely in the easiest courses, which are also the largest. Now, the student experience was that these were very didactic. People were standing up and going through problem sets on the whiteboard, quite boring, not very interactive. And then this was all embedded in a wider culture where teaching was not necessarily not valued, but it wasn't signaled to be valued. So maybe it was valued, but this wasn't something observable. We introduced a radical transformation over the last 5-6 years, which has had a huge effect. I want to focus my the next 2-3 minutes on what we did to support, to train basically these teachers, these inexperienced teachers who carry the burden of such an important part of teaching in the department. What was interesting is we completely redesigned our degree, but the improvement in teaching was observed long before then. So it really was driven by the improvement in the teaching of these PhD students. So what you're seeing here, let me just explain. At the end of every teaching term, class teachers are evaluated. And this shows the
Dimitra, can I interrupt
CEFs.
for a second?
Sorry?
We're still on your first slide. Is that?
Oh, okay. Okay, let me try again. But hopefully you've understood despite
Oh,
this.
absolutely.
Oh God, okay, why don't I not animate it? Maybe you can just see it in.
Yeah, let's just stick with that.
Stick with that. So what I was trying to say was that we had a lot of innovation and we saw some improvement. So this is the improvement we saw. These are the cumulative density functions of the class teaching survey results over these thousands of teaching hours. We have many observations that led to this. These are graded on 1 to 5, where 5 is the best. And I guess in a nutshell, if I had to sort of explain it, 6 years ago, 1 in 5 of our class teachers scored less than 4 out of 5. But now that is down to 5%. Very little class teaching is happening at an evaluative level below 4. In fact, our average is now 4.4, 4.5 out of 5. It's an incredibly high average. And I hate to say a lot of this left tail is coming from some of my faculty colleagues who are teaching. On the NSS, we've also seen a huge increase, and this is before our curriculum change. So what we did and why I think it worked. So what did we do to transform this? We went to a lot of effort to put in place changes through the whole life cycle of a course or a module within a course, whatever, so that when someone was teaching, it wasn't just a training up front and that was it. Of course, we did train our GTAs in-house up front, and we made an effort in signaling to them the value. Now, there's a limit to how much you can train someone to teach before they've ever been in the classroom. So we really didn't rely on that. We relied on the ongoing, right? So first of all was, of course, a system of training with follow-up, which I think most academic departments would do. The second thing is trying to create a community of these teachers, which we did through a welcome event, ongoing socials, and more importantly, a lot of oversight and regular communication through teams, which I'll sort of show you. Senior members of the department that they wouldn't normally expect to hear from would come and talk to them about their first experiences class teaching. So suddenly this transformed into something we do on the side of a PhD to something integral to our learning, sort of training to be an academic. And we emphasized a lot how your research presentations can improve if you teach well, and that helped as well. I will talk in my final minute more about this oversight because I think that was very important and that is not done in most places. But of course, at the end, we also rewarded teaching, but we did it in a very visible way. Like it wasn't just, you give people a prize that no one knows about. It was kind of, celebrated. But we also put our money where our mouth is. We have a very extensive class teaching bonus scheme. So we thought, well, we're economists. How do we incentivize an activity? So we have a 2-tiered bonus system, which works very much like contribution pay for those in the UK. So when I say oversight of teaching to try and share best practice and improve, what do I mean? Every large course has a course manager. This is like a head TA who has a couple of years of experience. And then everyone else is new. And we use technology, sort of Teams, to keep track of what everyone is doing. People can ask questions. So this is, for example, the Teams channel for every teacher. And there's ongoing communication. Maybe you could do this. Here are some resources. This is an idea I had. It worked in my class this week. And it's very heavily used. But then within a module, we have this. The same thing where supporting the people who support the teacher. So every course has a head TA, and then we support those guys. So there's a lot of kind of flow of communication and sharing of practice week by week. And in a way, that training is in a way forgotten and replaced by what happens. There is a requirement for a weekly meeting in every single course where we discuss, what we're going to teach, how we're going to do it. People say, oh, I did it last year and this worked well. And this, again, is developing a resource. And over time, what this has done over 2-3 years is it's developed. Usually when you have a problem sheet, you have the solutions, right? We have the solutions, but we now also have the teaching guidance that goes with it, just sort of shared practice. So what we've morphed into is something like this. You have the question and the answer, but now all this community building has created the teaching guidance that goes with it. So sort of the narrative of why this is taught in this way to this audience. And that is very different. We never really had anything like that. And I think it's worked because it's part of the daily conversation, how we do things and why. And it really sets expectations. It signals incredibly the value of teaching and that the department places on it. And in a way, people realize that this is how other people are doing it. I should do the same. It's very costly to set up front, but then it isn't, because once everyone is in this new normal, and we've got the systems in place, it's very easy. It sort of rolls out. So it was costly up front, but then, everyone is just doing their bit, and it rolls forward, and you build practice. And that's it for me.
Dimitra, that was fantastic.
Thank
Sounds
you.
like you're doing so many cool things there. I'm gonna ask one question, and
Sure.
then we'll move on, and I'm excited to talk more about this afterward.
Sure.
It sounds like the main outcome you were trying to improve was these evaluation scores. And it seems really clear that the students are happier and more satisfied with the class. But were there other outcomes you were also keeping an eye on?
Well,
so I guess what I'm
definitely.
worried about is I've seen faculty get hammered for low course evaluations, and then they just make their course easier and make no other changes.
No.
Course evaluations go up.
Our courses are definitely not easier, but I think the goal was not to improve these scores. It was a consequence of what we did. The main goal was to reduce heterogeneity of outcomes in terms of what students were experiencing. There's always some passionate teachers, right? We're all passionate teachers here. So there was pockets of this. It's translating that into sort of a department strategy on a wider level, right? And sharing the practice, having a place where the people who innovate can have a conversation with the others and say, I tried this. Before it was disparate, right? There was none of that.
So these instructors working in silos on their own, some of them doing an amazing job, others just kind of getting by. And so let's get them together and have them work together.
And also when someone left, because once you gain experience, you move on to a higher level course. All that knowledge was then lost. Well, now we have, we develop it, the Teams channel continues, and, practice improves. And really it's more about what is your value added in the classroom. All the narrative is around how will we add value in this classroom this week. And I think that was the punchline, adding value. Thanks.
I've like 10 more questions, but I'm going to hold those, and I promise I'll allow other people to ask questions too when we get to this discussion. But next up, we have Ralph, and Ralph, you're up. Thank you, Dimitra.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Dimitra, for your views. I think I'll connect to some what you said. Especially Dimitra talked about GTAs and how to support GTAs, and that was amazing. I'm going to talk a little bit more about lecturers, and I'll pick up something that Michael said before. Michael said, hey, we're offering lecturers to have conversations and then think about their classes. What I want to talk about is especially these conversations. Right, so that's it. And conversations on the background of why never solve the problem. Doug posed us at the beginning. Why do colleagues perhaps not do what we think, what we've learned works well in classrooms? Now, forgive me for being a crass categorizationalist here. Let's for the moment imagine there are two types of colleagues who perhaps have trouble adopting or accepting that perhaps I should use some other ideas. There are those colleagues who, for reason or no good reasons, underlie the tyranny of student reviews, like Dimitra has shown us some before on the GTA level, and you will all have these, teaching reviews by students that give you some score, also between 1 and 5 for us. Importantly, they also give you comments, written comments on what you do, and tell you that you're the most arrogant teacher they've ever seen, or that you're the best thing since sliced bread. So colleagues can get very focused on these, and that can be problematic, as Doug has mentioned before. There are, of course, also the type of colleagues who say, hey, we've always done it like this. Why should I think of something? I've learned my stuff like this. So that's not the only reasons of why things can be difficult, why it can be difficult, but these are certainly two reasons why it can be difficult to convince colleagues. So the solution, or let's see, an approach to perhaps tackling this in both occasions is really a conversation. No, I don't think anything else works really, be that a conversation with colleagues like Michael in teaching centers, or perhaps a colleague with the teaching leadership team in a department. And what I want use my time for is a little bit on what do we do in these conversations that perhaps help. So firstly, we see them very much as sort of reflective conversations in which we use a range of inputs, and the student comments and student inputs are an important input on here, but just as important is peer reviews, like Michael mentioned them before as well. They would often come from colleagues, but I think the most important aspect is actually the reflections of the lecturers, like the lecturer thinking back on what worked and what didn't work, and then importantly perhaps also ideas from the teaching leadership team. Like, I'll elaborate that myself in a particular example. So typically these meetings start with questions like, reflecting on your unit last year. What do you think worked well? What do you think didn't work so well? And the reason why this is so important is that the reflections of the lecturer, they will help the lecturer to also put into context what the other feedback says, the feedback from colleagues, from peer reviews, but from students. I think one of the biggest problems we can potentially have as a department is if we leave colleagues alone with interpreting student feedback. If you don't talk to them, if you just leave them at the end of the term, they get their feedback and they will read everything. Perhaps the ratings were okay, but they get feedback. It's very difficult yourself to reflect on this. You really need someone else to tell you, hey, this is a comment you should really ignore. Right? Don't worry about this comment. We all get this. Or actually, yeah, that's a negative comment from the perspective of the student, but actually, isn't that exactly what you want? So sometimes you get comments like this. So it's really important that you help your colleagues interpreting the student feedback. Ideally, we help colleagues to not take them personally, but I think that's a lost battle. At least I, in my many years, haven't learned how to not take comments personally, so I'll perhaps give up on that. But an important aspect of these meetings can then also be that you can reinforce with colleagues what they are good at. And it's surprising how rarely colleagues are being told that they're doing things very well in teaching. Yes, sometimes students say something, but perhaps that's not the aspects that are actually really important. That's, oh, he tells good jokes, but is that really important for your teaching? Sometimes what colleagues really need is sort of positive reinforcement. Actually, you're doing this well. And if you don't meet with them, who's going to tell them? Who's going to tell them? Now, importantly for younger colleagues, it's very important that they understand that the ratings they get do not dominate sort of discussion when it comes to their probation or when it comes to promotion. Certainly not here at the University of Manchester. Okay, it's what's much more important is sort of a support statement they get from their department. And what drives the support statement is exactly knowledge about, well, you know, how they reflect on their units. Have they learned from problems they had 1 year, and what did they do about it the next year? And, you know, seeing this process, you can really only see in these meetings, and they hopefully help you to tell some colleagues, hey, don't worry so much about the ratings, because if colleagues worry too much about the ratings, they can become very risk averse. I think, oh, no, let me not try this. Oh, group work, no, how will students react? No, let me not do that. But if you can sit together, colleagues, and say, hey, I think that tackles the problem you have, perhaps of student engagement, try it. I don't worry if next year we realize that students really dislike the group work because they had students which, you know, didn't work. Don't worry about that. That's on our back. We back you with this attempt. Okay. So that can be, I think, very, very important. And in these meetings, you can then also bring in sort of departmental priorities. You sometimes have that, let's say, you know, we know, you could say, well, we know as a department, we need to do this better, say, give feedback or have more real life problems for students. How can you in your course help us as a department to do that? Because it's not only the problems of individual lecturers, it's often sort of problems of a whole, Dimitra said, a culture in the department, right? But everyone can contribute to that. But if you don't have these conversations, it's very difficult to help students with that. All in all, I think there are also occasions where we can help lecturers to understand themselves much more as sort of coaches or trainers of students rather than lecturers. And because that is a problem, especially sort of the more experienced colleagues have, they see themselves very much like traditional lecturers and not enough as sort of standing on the side of the students, pushing the students, supporting the students. And sort of that understanding is sort of best communicated in individual conversations when you think about particular problems in a class. Dimitra mentioned value add, and that's exactly what we often in these conversations try to think about. What's the value you add for your lectures, for your tutorials, for your online material? What's the value you add? Right? So I think these conversations are very costly, and I'm afraid to say we're not having them every year with every colleague. I wish we could, we don't. But we are trying to have them wherever we know there's an issue, and certainly with new colleagues. And my time, I already overran my time by 2 minutes. Apologies for that, Doug, but I'm finishing here.
Wow, that was super interesting. No apology necessary. And can I just say, I love the slides. They're so calming.
Okay, hopefully nobody fell asleep.
No, I think I mean, I think something you didn't say is like, but I mean, you touched on it. In these conversations, you have to talk about the positive too. Because while they might not be high pressure for you, like I think for the instructor, like when you're talking about things they can improve in their teaching, they're hearing you say you're a bad teacher. And it's hard to get those conversations right. And I think the tone is so important.
No, that's right. That's right. I can, and colleagues are often very anxious about these meetings. There's another evaluation. So just in terms of strategy of these meetings has to be to create a positive, productive environment. But then one way to do that is just to tell colleagues, hey, I read your student feedback. Your student saying some lovely things about you. Clearly, you can do this extremely well. Let's build on this.
That's great. That's great. Thank you, Ralph. All right, our last panelist is Anoshua, and Anusha, you're up.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm going to share my slides. Can everyone see this? Okay.
Yes.
Um, so thank you for inviting me to this panel. I speak from my experience doing student success initiatives in the economics department, and also supporting the entire campus. I'm just gonna escape out from here for just a second. Okay, let's do this way. All right. I had my notes, but I'm sort of fumbling around for those notes. So in the economics department for the last few years, we focused, and I'm going to move up our focus a little bit from student evaluations that Dimitra had talked about. We focused on failure rates and equity gaps. So San Francisco State is a minority serving large public university, so we get a lot of first generation low income students. We were beginning to see that our outcomes were not similar across different groups, and we were starting to look for pedagogies and classroom practices that would speak to these different groups. And some of you have mentioned that. What we've learned is that, teaching the teachers through communities of practice have really been what has worked for us. And we have a few models that we've tried, put people in squares or fours, create teaching buddies to look at their data, look at who they're teaching, who their students are, what the different grade outcomes are. And we've tried to create a sort of a community where people look at each other's courses, but also come together to talk about student learning outcomes, harmonize course content across sections, because when we first started this work, everybody was doing their own thing. People were giving their own tests. So there was no way to know the standards at which instructors were testing students. So creating these course shells, creating weekly meetings where people could share each other's strategies, creating more student engagement, and coordinating graduate assistants who were helping our instructors, as well as bringing in near-peer mentors and peer tutors, really helped in reducing the high failure rate courses. What we learned, and we have a paper where we pull together these results, and what we've learned is that instructors who participated in these teaching learning courses actually showed results. We see 6% lower failure rates as compared to those who did not come to these conversations. And a lot of these observed changes were because of what instructors learned from each other. We tend to, in our introductory economics courses, we tend to give students homework to do on their own, maybe problem sets, and then 2 large exams. But what we learned was multiple low stakes assignments, less importance on the lower grade proportion on exams, graded attendance or graded class activities, having office hours on the same day. These kinds of practices that instructors came together and shared and came up with are actually seem to be working in these classes. And then we look at different groups of students, and we found these equity gaps. And what we learned was different classroom practices affect different students. For example, um, our low-income students who are working multiple very long hours and taking these classes, maybe multiple frequent assignments may not work for them. Transition to remote um, teaching during COVID didn't serve a lot of our students who did not have access to um, access to technology. And we also learned that students may not always know what kind of modalities work for them. They would choose things that are easier or more convenient, but maybe these modalities don't serve them well. So what are some things that we are learning at CETL that we can bring back to economics? A lot of my colleagues in economics kind of brush aside student performance as saying, oh, they're not well prepared enough, or they don't know the math enough. And I think looking at how my colleagues around campus are bringing this work together is really focusing on that asset-mindedness. Every student has some strength they bring to the classroom. How do we play up that strength? How do we partner with that student? How do we bring faculty representation? Faculty role models are huge drivers of student success. We've also learned from our our communication studies department that some of our Latinx students are not completing classes because they miss oral presentations. There's something going on there that we want to dig a little more. Some of our English as a second language students are more likely to be using AI tools to write. And what we are learning is they're at huge risk of linguistic erasure. And I can give you more examples if we have time. We also see that linguistic equity is really important to reach multilingual students. Are we giving instructions in a way that students understand our instructions? And finally, as some of you mentioned this before, that are we speaking to different groups of students in our classroom through our content and through our examples? So what do we need to do this work? I want to just focus a little bit on this. Incentives. We are all economists. We understand incentives. I think during COVID, our campus got a lot of federal dollars, and we used this HERF money to bring faculty up to set up their classes for online course modalities, and we gave out stipends at our Center for Teaching and Learning. That's sort of become the modus operandi that it seems to be. The signal was that this is all extra work, and that we need to be compensated for this extra work. But some of this can be done with proper recognition. And Paroma had said in the chat that maybe faculty buy-in is important, or department head and administration buy-in is important. I think that would be helpful through the tenure promotion evaluations and lecturer compensation evaluations. We need resources that people have talked about before. We need community. I think we also need appreciation. We need appreciation events. And finally, we need formative feedback. It's not just evaluative feedback. Our peer feedback often ends up being evaluative. And I think it's very important that faculty do not feel that they are being put in a spot, but it should be more supportive. And that's why I loved, and we do the same at our center. I loved what Michael said about mid-semester student feedback. We call it small group instructional feedback, where faculty step out and a peer comes in and talks to the students, and then writes up a report for the peer. And we try at our center not to meddle with evaluations. We really want to give formative, supportive feedback so that faculty can take it back to their classroom and try different things and feel comfortable improving and help themselves improve. So I'm going to stop there.
Thank you very much, Anusha. That was great. Let's open it up. If you have questions, please do pop them into the chats, and Clodagh will organize them. I want to start with kind of a big question. This is for everyone on the panel. It's work to improve your teaching. Like, it requires investment. And I've heard a lot of talk from all the panelists about incentives. For example, Anusha talked about paying instructors for participating in professional development. You could also imagine on the negative side, where by negative I don't mean bad, where if some outcomes are particularly low for an instructor, they're required to go do the professional development activities. So this is kind of gets to Michael's comment that some people that show up are there because their chair told them they had to. Okay. I'd be really curious what things the panelists think work well and what don't work well, and both based on kind of actual experience with these incentives, but also kind of hypothetically what you think would work. Michael, why don't we kind of start with you?
Sure. So I think one incentive we offer is we offer professional development network credit. And so faculty earn these credits, and that speeds up the amount of time that they can get a new computer. So that's one thing that that they've done to try to incentivize it. But I think a lot of the incentives for faculty to take advantage of our services, or at least I think is the most effective, is if you're doing a good job as a center, faculty are going to find that out, and then they talk to one another and they say, hey, you know, I went and attended this and I learned a lot, and suddenly people are like, oh, maybe I should check that out. Others, you know, they also know they have a particular review coming up, and so they're highly incentivized to add whatever they can to their portfolio before submitting it. We try to stay away for the most part in terms of compensation. We do offer compensation, but it's usually for when we want faculty members to provide some sort of training or putting on a book club, et cetera. And there we offer money that can be used for their own professional development or going to conferences, et cetera.
Any of the other panelists want to comment on that? Yeah, Dimitra.
On the question of incentives, in my department, it would be unthinkable to pay academic colleagues to improve their courses. It's considered part of their job, right? I think the PhD students, it's a bit different, right? Because they're paid on these different short-term contracts, and it's slightly different. I think if I had to think about it, you have intrinsic motivation to do a good job, and I have found that even with the most with the academics who are really not that interested in teaching, perhaps, they are interested in something, economics, right? So you can often try and think what would be exciting for them. So I'll give you one example, a very brief one. There's an agenda to diversify assessment, so we're not so much exam-based. And that means projects and other activities for students. Now, someone who's not very teaching oriented thinks, oh my God, what projects can I design? This is going to take ages. Who's going to grade them? How am I going to update it? So I went and had a conversation with a colleague. I said, how are you doing? He said, I'm preparing for a research grant. And I said, maybe your project would be a fictitious research bid. And that's what we do in that course. He designed a call for funding, a fictitious call for funding, and the task was to design a research experiment. And he used the funding application. He was writing all the part except the budget, obviously, not overheads and stuff. And that's what students had to do. Working groups, you have to write, what is your research question? What is your method? What is your data? So I said, you can draw, that's a skill, right? Putting together a research proposal, that's a skill. Teach them that. He was over the moon. And it's something so innovative and blah, blah, blah. And he loves it. He knows what it is and he knows how to grade it. So it's more about trying, you can't, impose an essay on that guy. But maybe there's something he can bring to the table. That's what I think.
Yeah. Ralph?
Yeah, I'm happy to add to Dimitra, sort of in the same vein. Often the colleagues are sort of stuck for ideas, right? And they're sort of, they realize they're not enjoying it. Perhaps the students are not enjoying it. And what they need is help to get an idea like the one Dimitra has described, and something to bring pride, or may I even say joy, back. Right? Last year we had a conference here, the D conference, and the keynote was on the joy of teaching. And for some people, joy is very far away. Okay, but pride in having done something new is very important. And then I agree, we can't pay more for teaching. And I think Parma also said that there's, of course, also the danger or the perception that perhaps sometimes colleagues feel that, oh, if I do this very well, you'll just give me a big course, a big first-year course, because I'll do this well. That's not really what I want. Perhaps you also have to talk to colleagues about what are your goals here on the teaching side, and can we agree on that? And perhaps that's not to teach the biggest first-year unit, but perhaps it's that you want to create a new third-year optional course that perhaps aligns very well with your research components. And if you need to get them on board and have common goals.
Yeah,
I wanted to add to that.
Yeah, Anusha.
I want to make 2 points. There might be universities like San Francisco State where almost 50% of our faculty are adjunct faculty, lecturer faculty, who because of the high cost of living area, they're teaching multiple courses at multiple campuses. And so we've figured out that they're not going to come to this conversation. They're not going to come to extra meetings if we did not compensate them. So we are trying to grapple with, how do we help faculty come to these conversations? And of course, our full-time faculty, we expect them to do good teaching and do teaching development without extra compensation. But I think all of this, we don't need to do these inequitable and different varied compensations if we build these things into our evaluations. Just like scholarship is valued in the academy, why can't we also put in teaching development as part of our evaluative process?
I mean, I do think that different departments have different cultures around teaching. The departments that I've taught in tend to have a culture where your teaching has to be above a certain bar. That bar is pretty low. And then after that, all promotion, hiring, tenure, all those decisions are based on your research output. And it's hard to, like, the faculty that are paid to teach, I think you can make an argument that like professional development and getting better and doing a good job is like part of their job, and that's what you're paid for, so go do it. But at the I'm saying at both ends of the spectrum, both these adjunct faculty that are paid to teach one course and have a lot of them, it's hard to get them to do things. It's hard to get the really research focused faculty to invest in teaching. Yeah. My gosh, so many questions. Ralph, I'm really intrigued, and I think a lot of people are intrigued based on all these questions about these conversations. So I'm going to give you like some very nuts and bolts questions. Are you the only one that does these conversations? How many do you do? How many faculty are involved in them? I assume they're one-on-one. How do those faculty get chosen? How long are the conversations? How often do they happen?
Oh gosh. So I wish I could, the conversations built around units, not colleagues. Right? But then there's a colleague who's the leader for the unit. That for starters, I'd say I possibly have between 20 and 30 of those a year, and I have another colleague who has perhaps another 10 or 15, I would say. Sometimes they happen sort of very formally, where we agree we're going to do this. Sometimes they happen a little bit more informally, but they're typically not less than an hour on a unit. How are they chosen? So I certainly I try and have them with new colleagues for sure, and then with colleagues where I know there is an issue, right, that perhaps needs to be addressed. There isn't a formal process behind that. It's sort of at my colleagues, my sort of undergrad director, at our whim a little bit, where we think the time is best invested. Does that answer your questions, though?
But do you talk to the undergrads? Like a lot of it's hard to get visibility on what's happening in a lot of these classrooms without talking to the students.
Yeah, well, so we see stuff from student surveys, okay? So we would usually always use last year's student surveys as input into these conversations, but we also have interim, we call them student staff liaison meetings, where students raise issues, or sometimes, mainly they raise issues, sometimes they also say, hey, that person is great. Then we have peer reviews. Sometimes peer reviews reveal sort of, issues that may have to be tackled with that. But it's not an immediate and urgent thing. It's sort of something we do. We have this for the next academic year. It's like I may now meet with someone to talk about next year's teaching. It's really somewhere between having done the course and delivering it. Again, it's a reflective meeting.
So when a colleague gets an email, when they see they have an email from you, they don't say, oh no.
Who knows? Some may think so.
Okay.
Yeah. And the beginning, I think we've sort of hopefully normalized these conversations a bit, but I'm sure at the beginning there, and I know, remember back there a few meetings which sort of were quite tense, and sometimes they are, because sometimes, I said earlier, you have to stress the positives, but of course, if there's problems, they need to be talked about, and that can be quite difficult. So it's perhaps understanding that some colleagues come in tense, and sometimes you can't remove all of that tension in a meeting either.
Right. We have a kind of a general question for all of you that's very related to this, which is, what do you do about colleagues when you have a colleague that's like a poor performer? What does the department do? So one of the things would be to initiate one of these conversations. Do any of the other panelists have thoughts on how to deal with cases where there's an issue, there are things that this colleague should be or could be doing better? Yeah, Anashwa.
I can say this from my department chair experience. I had quite a few of these, you have to be ready to have some of these hard conversations. But there are also some things you can do if you bring that asset-mindedness into this work. Maybe talking to the faculty members, saying that maybe this class is really not what plays to your strength. Maybe look at some other classes that they can really teach well and reassign them, or have them think about what might be going on in their class. And if they're truly not interested, I mean, I've had some professors who teach these large lecture classes just so that they can have fewer preps. And I had to move them out of those classes because we had some mandates to fill.
No, I've seen that too. I mean, I actually think, I think it was Dimitra that mentioned in the chat, giving departments that give extra credit for teaching the larger classes. It's not just fair. It also gives you a tool to incentivize good teaching, because you only get those classes if you do a good job. I've seen that happen in departments. My current department, we don't give anyone any extra credit, no matter how large their class is, and it's not great. It's not great. A question for Dimitra. You mentioned that one of the main goals was getting more uniformity in the quality of the teaching that happens in these classes where you have multiple instructors teaching the same class. That sounds great to me, but Clodagh raised the potential issue is, are you stifling innovation this way?
No, because I don't think we are. I think we're giving a space for the teachers to bring ideas to the table. So we don't really, no one is telling them what to teach. I mean, obviously they like, for example, they might agree on something like, oh my God, there are 8 questions. We have time only for 5. Let's have a strategy on how to select the 5 or something like this. Because students in some class groups might say, my teacher didn't cover question 6. In your class, they covered question 6, that kind of thing. But in terms of the actual kind of, I introduced a poll, or I did this, that, I think it's sort of giving a place where individual teachers can suggest stuff. So, yeah, I think it's fine. I think what's good is that when they do suggest something, they share materials. So they might say, I created a poll, here is my poll. So you can like roll it out if you want. So there's more sharing, which I think is good.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. Like,
Yeah,
in some
yeah.
sense, this is since if you innovate, there's the potential that it affects even more students than just your own students. That's an incentive to innovate more. And there's like group, I mean, heterogeneous groups come up with better ideas. So maybe in these,
So maybe it's good because there is that weekly chat, right? But I suppose one other thing is these teaching awards. How do we select who to reward, right? So I don't want it to be the highest scorers because that's always the same people. Anyway, right? Yep. Often it's the same people. So I actually reach out to all the lecturers and they'll often say, you know what, this guy brought lots of ideas to the table. So I might have an innovation prize or a best newcomer prize or a biggest improvement prize. Although that has to be phrased well, you know.
You could game it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna tank it and just not answer any student email for the whole term and then kill it the next. Yeah. Economists are terrible to work with it that way. Question for Michael. You had mentioned that one of the things your teaching center offers is a certificate. Is that required for new faculty, not required at all? Do departments pay any attention to this when they're doing promotion? What's the incentive to get one of these certificates?
Not required at all. We sell it to the new faculty at the welcome and for them. some departments do recommend it to faculty members after they go through their initial review. So that's one of the things they recommend they do. But the incentives on that one are entirely driven by the participants who decide to sign up. But you know, I know personally a few of them that went through MSU, and the main reason they were doing it was because they were approaching the review year and they wanted something else in there that signified that they're working for.
Got it.
So
Yeah, okay. Okay. I have another question for Dimitra. These so these graduate student instructors, I'm not going to call them teaching assistants, just because when I think teaching assistant, I don't think of somebody that teaches, that actually stands in front of the class and does the teaching of the class.
Okay. Yeah.
Are these all graduate students from LSE, or do you hire graduate students from nearby institutions as well?
Mainly from LSE. We have a scholarship where they get a scholarship. They get money to be. They don't pay fees. The opposite, right?
Yep.
They get a stipend and they have to teach 200 hours. That's contact hours over 4 years, starting in their second year. So they don't teach in the very first year. The PhD students, we train them up. But sometimes there are gaps, and we would hire from other places. But we are spoiled for choice because at LSE there are economists in other departments.
Right.
So there'll be like economists in the finance department, the management department, the geography department. So sometimes, you know, we're quite spoiled for choice.
Right.
But they will be forced to attend these meetings and everything. You know, yeah, you're not off the hook if you're from outside.
Claudia mentioned that there are places that don't hire that many of their own students, but hire from nearby universities.
This is true. This is true.
And so it's harder to do these kind of communities of practice in that kind of environment.
Well, my view is the opposite, right? Because we have the benefit of they're here for 5 years, they develop a culture. If you bring people from outside, you might need more training, more oversight, right? If you just let them do whatever, how are you going to benchmark their standard?
Right. Right.
So you need more induction. You need induction for those guys.
So
yeah.
I have another question for Anoshua. You mentioned these communities of practice, squares and buddies. So groups of 4, groups of 2, maybe you could say a little bit more about that, and how often they meet, and remind us how you get the adjuncts to do it. Like, are you paying them to participate in these sorts of things?
Yes, so we had a really successful model of teaching squares, where we invited 4 faculty members to come together in a group to share teaching, and instead of having 10 people try to coordinate calendars, 4 is easier. And we have a model of paying lecturer faculty. We don't pay full-time faculty, but and we have like our campus is a unionized campus, so we have these things kind of set in stone. So it's like $50 an hour kind of compensation. And the buddy system is where we ask faculty in a community of practice. Let's say we have 20 or 30 people in a community looking at, let's say, data-informed teaching learning, where they're looking at our institutional research dashboards and maybe even other forms of data or survey data that the department has collected. And we put people in buddies because, again, I agree with some of the conversations that came up that it's hard to look at your own data objectively, but it's easier when you are sharing it with someone else, and then you're sharing each other's data, so you're not alone. You don't feel like this is only your problem. I think that supportive framework is what we are trying to achieve, and that faculty have same problems. They're not alone in this. How can we learn from each other?
Got it. Got it. The squares and buddies, are they teaching the same course or are they teaching different courses?
So it depends on what community of practice they're in. So let's say if we look at the data informed work, we try to put people in similar departments, if not the same department. We have multiple people from the same department, we put them together. Or if we had a model this semester where the person from, say, economics department had to go find another person in the economics department as their buddy to look at their data together. But if it's something like looking at inclusive pedagogies, we ask folks, or climate justice, we ask folks to find, or we put people in teaching squares from different departments so that they can learn from different practices and different disciplines, just because then the learning will be a lot richer.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, I think there's like gains from uniform groups, but also gains from different kind of cross course groups too. Okay, so this is a question that I'm going to combine several questions because I think they all kind of get at a similar idea, which is a lot of times the students don't know what's best for them. And this can mean you get low course evaluations when you're doing something that's good for them, but they don't like. There's evidence that some students, they find kind of active learning methods where they have to do work in the classroom as opposed to kind of show up and relax harder. And those classrooms, they don't look like what they see on TV as a college classroom where the smart lecturer is coming. Instead, they have to listen to their dumb classmates, and they paid good money to hear the fancy professor talk. So they want that. And so I think this can come up in the ratings, but it can also come up in conversations with students or comments that students leave in their course evaluations. So for all of you, I'm really curious what you do when an instructor comes to you and says, I tried this active learning stuff. My students didn't like it. I think I should go back to lecture.
Can I start?
Yeah, Ralph, why don't you start? Kick us off.
Yeah. You can't. So the important thing is what the lecturer thinks. Okay, yes, students don't like it, or at least some students who commented on it in the survey didn't like it. Have you had any other feedback during the term that perhaps doesn't show on the survey? And what do you think about it? Do you think it has achieved what you wanted to achieve? And help I think it's important to help the lecturer to think through this, to think about which comments to ignore, which one resonate with your own perception of what has happened. And if then the lecturer says, well, I don't think it achieved what I wanted to achieve. It's just, students sat together for 20 minutes, but just talked about their, lunch they had or whatever, or what they watched on TikTok. And then you need to, think through with the lecturer what's the reason for that? Can we change it? Are your problems not right? So there isn't a general solution, but it's important to not leave the lecturer alone with this thinking.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Anyone else? Yeah, I'm not sure.
I think what I would like to say here is I think partnering with students, having that conversation the first day of class about the objective of the class is just so important. And I think this is going to come around to us a lot when, if you think about how AI is going to matter in our classrooms, we are going to have to think about what assignment you allow use of AI, what assignments you're not going to allow use of AI? Why is it important for the class or not important for the class? I think, partnering with students on this conversation is important. I think, yeah, for many, many years, I've taught a service learning class, and I think selling the importance to the student, but also letting them know that they have a choice and then they can drop and find another class if that first day of class, first week of class, is perfectly fine. But having that open conversation with the student is important. I think this also gets to grading. Post-COVID, with resilient teaching, we've seen that students are pushing the boundaries on deadlines, right? There's mental health issues, there's things going on. We have different kinds of students in the classroom. We haven't even got to figuring out how to serve our neurodivergent, invisible, disabled students. All of these issues are coming up more and more in the classroom. How are we going to work with all this? One size is not going to fit all, but I think partnering with the student, talking to the student, or maybe even creating structures in a way that different groups of students self-select themselves, is going to be important.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up on that and say, I think it's really important to explain why we're doing things in the classroom and why we want them to work in the classroom and why it's better than just me talking at them. And why there are like appropriate places to use the AI to make their job easier, and why having the AI do your homework is defeating the whole purpose of doing the homework. I use this phrase, you think the learning happens in the lecture, but the learning actually happens when you go home and you actually work through these problems and you realize, oh, I thought I understood it, but I didn't understand it. And when the AI is doing that, like, it's just a big waste of time. Yeah. Michael or Dimitra, did you? Yeah, Michael.
Absolutely. Professor doing this, and I don't have to imagine it at all. The first time I switched to a much more active learning classroom, I got those comments on my evaluation. But one student told me I needed to go learn how to teach from the guys I know, just straightforward lectures. So after that, luckily, Bill Goff gave me a copy of an article about creating buy-in on the first day and asking students a series of questions about what they want to do in that class. And it's a creative way for them to essentially realize that spending the class time kind of working through the more difficult problems is a much better way of conducting class, and for them to understand that a lot of the reading of basic facts and so forth can be done on their own outside of the classroom. So I think it's crucial to create that initial buy-in, and I think it's also crucial to continuously communicate with your students what you're doing and why you're doing it. After I did that, the comments on the end of semester evaluations disappointed.
Yeah. Dimitra, did you want to add anything to that?
I just added in the chat that when you iterate and when you innovate, it's going to take more than one attempt to get it exactly right, right? There's some learning. So.
Yeah. We have about 8 minutes left, and we've talked a lot about kind of structural changes and things that departments can do to incentivize better teaching and get people to do professional development and kinds of professional development we can offer. But I think most of us here don't have that level of control. We can advise our chairs. We can go back to our chairs and say, I went to this conference and they said we should be doing X, Y, and Z, and pass that information along, which is great. But I think for this group here, including myself, the biggest avenue for change we have is giving advice and like having these peer-to-peer conversations. And so I want to ask each of the presenters to give me your 1 minute. A colleague comes to you and they kind of open up and they're like, my class didn't go that well. What do you say? What do you give them a piece of advice? Do you have like key questions where you can kind of tease out what went wrong? What do you do? Maybe we'll go in the order that we started with. So Michael, what do you think?
Nice, that puts me on the spot. So, I mean, in the role that I'm in right now, somebody that I would say, now, I don't want to celebrate your bad performance here. That's great. That's what we're here for, right? I mean, that's why we exist, is to help you improve your teaching. And I would, probably start with an individual consultation. And then during that individual consultation, you dig a little bit deeper and figure out kind of why they think it didn't go well, and then, recommend items from them.
Yeah, okay. I don't know, Demetra, you already had a good one, which is don't expect everything to go well the first time.
Yeah, usually our colleagues will come to me with a complaint, not I want to improve, but something like these students are getting worse and worse.
Yeah.
They don't come to my lecture or something. Usually it's a complaint, and then you try and get to the bottom of what it could be. That's the reason, and you try and come up with an idea. Some of the clues are in the student comments. You can do some due diligence on the ground to try and work out. But if they come to you, usually they're receptive to ideas. So, yeah, a bit of everything you suggested.
Yeah. Ralph?
Yeah, totally agree with what Demetra said, and perhaps sometimes focusing colleagues on the student perspective to think through the problem, perhaps from the student perspective, can help. Not always, it doesn't always help, but it can be perhaps explain, for instance, why do students not come to my lectures? Right? And then say, so why, what do you think? Why do they not? And quite often colleagues will come up with pretty good reasons why that may be the case. And then you're in a position from where you can work and think about that.
Yeah. Anoshua?
I think having that conversation, I think a colleague mentor had told me when I first started teaching that it's a really good idea to keep semester by semester reflections of your teaching. And just taking that pause at the end of the semester and going over what went well, what didn't go well, is such a good practice to grow as a teacher. And if somebody came to me, I would say, I would sell CETL's small group instructional feedback. It's great to have a peer go in and talk to your students without you in the classroom. And having that kind of mid-semester feedback really is so valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I actually do this sort of reflection after every specific lecture I teach. So I could do better about it if I did it at the end of the term and really thought big picture. But it's also useful just at a micro level after every class. And then when you go back to teach that class, I mean, sometimes it's as simple as when I taught this one little 3-minute part of the lecture, it didn't make any sense. Here's some ideas for how to fix it. And then there you go. The night before, I open up the slides, I look at it and I'm like, oh, let me tweak that. And sometimes it takes 6 years and then you nail it. It feels so good when you finally do. I had a friend who said, you remember when you learned to ride a bike and you got on it and you started to pedal and it just worked the first time? Of course not. Did you fall off and then stopped and like, I guess I'll never ride a bike? No, you keep trying. Like it takes more than one time to figure some of this stuff out. And so I think we want our students to be resilient. I think we have to be resilient too. We're at 2 minutes to go. I think now is actually a good time to stop. We have a mixer at the end of the conference. That's at, wait, let me get it right. At 6 o'clock UK time, 1 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. But our next session starts any minute, and it's going to be on collaborative learning, kind of having students teach each other and work together. And so thank you all for coming. A special thanks to our presenters. And hope to see you in the next session and throughout the next 3 days. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Doug.
Is there a different link for the next session?
I'm just looking that up right now. Every year we change
I-
things a little bit, so I'm never sure if we change that.
I only saw one link, that's why I was
Yeah.
asking.
I can't see it either. Can someone?
Claude,
Magic.
are we still here? I feel like you should know.
Or CTEL team. Who's behind CTEL team?
Detail team. Yeah, Damien, are you here? All right. The thing is, there's a green room, which is where all the presenters go in between sessions to kind of get ready, and then they come to the room. I'm pretty sure it's the same link. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, it's the same link.
Roxana knows, and my older child, we named her Roxana, and so I trust her.